We are now recording. Awesome. So yeah, we're going to implement, again, for the recording, we're going to implement next and previous button feature where we're going to render either the next post or the previous post using Ajax and jQuery. Cool. All right. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I can make an API call to that particular resource and get back JSON as a response. So if we take a look at my routes right now, we can see the only routes I have defined are for my route. We got resources for posts and resources for comments. So any route that responds with JSON, I want to attach an API namespace in front of it. And again, there's a number of ways we can do this. I'm just going to do the most contrived way, and then from there, you guys can formulate your own patterns and how you want to implement these particular routes on your end. So in order to do that, we need, I'm going to do API/posts. Then we're going to pass in the ID, and that's going to go to my posts controller. And I'm going to declare a different action in my posts controller. I'm going to call it API show. Cool. So now, if we were to rake routes, we can see right here, we have a GET request to /API/posts with an ID route parameter, and that'll go to my posts API show. So then if I go to my post controller, I can define that particular action. Def API show. I'm just going to raise hello.inspect. Awesome. So there's the error that we wanted. So we hit that particular controller action. But we want this particular action to respond with JSON. So what gem do I need so that my controller will respond with the appropriate JSON? I'm sure you guys have probably worked with that gem before. Active model serializers. Oh, and I'm sure somebody just typed it in. jQuery, not jQuery Rails, but yeah, active model serializers is what we're looking for. So take a look at the documentation for active model serializers. We can see here we just need to add that into our gem file, run a bundle, and I'm going to kill my server and restart it. And then from there, we have access to commands to generate a serializer or serialized version of the resource that we want. So the command is Rails G serializer, and we want to serialize posts. Cool. All right, so now if we go back to our controller, in the API_show action, we can render JSON at post. First thing we need to do, there's already a set post before action, which if we go down here, it finds the post according to the params hash with the ID key. So then we can add that particular action of API show to that before action filter. So then before we even reach this particular action, it's going to go down here and find the particular post with the appropriate ID. So then we can respond with JSON with that actual post. So let's see what we got here. Oh, and one more thing with the serializers here. So whenever we generate serializers, we can see there's a new directory that gets created by active model serializers in the app directory. And here's the post serializer that we used running that Rails command. So right now in the post serializer, the only thing we're rendering is the ID, but I want to also render the title and the content, because I believe those are the attributes that a post has. Yeah, title and content. Awesome. All right, cool. So go back to the serializer. Cool. So that looks good. We go to our browser now. When I refresh, we'll see that I am now getting a JSON representation of that particular post. And again, that's being rendered by the controller action and post controller of API show. Cool. Any questions so far?
Is there a reason why you made a separate API show action and like not included under show? That I remember something like if you can make a thing that if there's a request for HTML, that.
Yeah, you can do a respond to do and then F and then f.format. Me personally, I like to have separate routes so that if a person goes to posts/ID, then it's going to be the Rails rendering of that particular post. Whereas if it's going to be a JSON response, I like to namespace it with API in front. But again, it's however you very well could do it that way. If you want the route to go to the same, then it would just be post to .json. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Good question.
And also, when you rendered the JSON, it rendered the whole post. Not also let's say the timestamps also rendered, not just the attributes that you specified in the serializer.
Let's see. Yeah, that's odd. I didn't notice that. Good catch. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Rendering attributes, title, content. Did I not save? No, I mean that should. Interesting.
What else?
Under JSON at post. That's right. I know a post has many comments, so let's see if those get rendered. Okay, something is up with my serializer. Hang on here. Let me just check something. I mean, I doubt a refiring of the server is going to do it, but we'll give it a shot. Nope. Does anyone see what my issue might be? Ah, singular. There we go. Stupid S. Cool. All right. So now we're rendering what we need to render. So that all looks good. Awesome. Cool. All right. So now we've got the backend wired to respond with the appropriate response. Now we can move into the front end and start to wire things the way we would like them to be wired. We go to post to, in our assets, JavaScripts, and we can create a new file, posts.js. I just like to do a quick to make sure that Rails is recognizing that file. Awesome. Cool. So now what we have to do is do a document ready. And what I want to do here is call a function called bind click. So we can click the event, or we can wire in the event handlers whenever a certain element is clicked. So here inside this bind click function, we can take a look at the particular posts. And actually, what we want to do is go ahead and add those buttons. So in the show, we can add them down here. Let's do a button tag. We'll do 2 button tags. And we'll make the first one, we'll do previous for the first one. And next. Awesome. And then I want previous to have a class of JS-prev. Next, to have a class of JS-next. Cool. And then also want to add the particular ID for this post to both of those buttons. So we're going to do a data hash. ID is going to be equal to post.id. Awesome. Cool. So now we see that these buttons have a data ID attribute equal to the ID of the post. So then we can use that data for when we make our API call on the back end. Cool. So now let's head. Any questions with what I've done so far before I move on to the next one? Cool. All right. So now let's grab the previous button and let's call the on method. And that's going to happen for whenever we click that button. Let's see, I really like console.logging over anything else. There we go, awesome. I'm just gonna duplicate that code here. So that's next. Cool. So once either of these buttons are clicked, then we want to make a call to our API. So what would I need to do first before I make that call? because eventually I'd want to make a call to API/posts, and in this case, it's going to be /3 because right now I'm in post number 2. So probably need to grab the ID of the existing post. So how would I use jQuery to grab the ID of this particular post?
The ID attribute of the button.
Mm-hmm. And let's create a constant of ID equals that. Let's make sure we're getting back the correct data. Awesome. Cool. So now that I have the ID, what I'm going to want to do is make a call to the API, but add 1 to that ID, because otherwise I'd be making a call to fetch the same post. So in order to do that, and I'm going to use fetch. Are you guys familiar with the fetch API? Okay. So this is supported in, I believe, all the Evergreen browsers now. And the way you use it is you call fetch. It takes in 1 argument. If it's a GET request, and I'm going to use template strings, and you just specify the particular route that you want, or the API. So it's going to be API posts / and then I'm going to use the $ and the open and closing curly braces here, and I'm going to do ID plus 1. Because again, the ID is set equal to 2, but we want the next post. So this is going to be the API that I'm going to be calling, the API route. Let's console.log, see what our response is. Cool. So what we get back when we make a call using fetch is a promise. And I'm not sure if you guys have read up much about promises, but they're a better way to handle async JavaScript calls rather than callback hell is what they call it. So the way we would resolve that promise is tack on a .then. And I'm going to use arrow functions in this particular case. So we're going to get back in our callback function to .then, we're going to get the response. And let's just console.log that response, see what it looks like. So you can see it's just basic response where they have the headers, they have the status, okay, 200, status text. What we're going to need to do with this response is convert it to JSON and return that value. So again, with an arrow function, if you have no curly braces, then the implicit return of that arrow function is the next expression evaluated. So I'm going to call res.json on that, and then this particular expression is going to be returned in the form of another promise, which we can tack on another .then, and we're finally going to get back our post. I'm going to console.log that post, and then we'll see what we get back. So we can see here, we get the object back of the next post with an ID of 3. Remember, we were here. This is the post that we were viewing, post 2. When we click previous, and I used the wrong math because this is the previous button, so it should be ID -1. So I'm going to copy this logic and apply the appropriate math by adding 1. Cool. And then we're going to have to handle some certain edge cases because what's going to happen if, you know, there is no next post. So we'll have to talk about that. But for now, we're just going to do the simple thing of just adding one or subtracting one whenever those buttons are clicked. Awesome. Cool. All right. So again, fetch API, become familiar with it. I mean, we could have technically also used, you know, either $.ajax, which takes in an object, or get JSON, but I like fetch. It's a lot more modern, and the handling of the response is a lot easier. And then from there, if we wanted to, we can do a .catch, which takes in an error, and then, you know, console.log the error. So some error handling there. Cool. All right, so once we get the response of the particular post here, I'm no longer gonna have the implicit return. I'm gonna add the curly braces, and we're gonna actually do some stuff inside the body of this callback function. Again, we get back a JSON representation of the post. We can create an object model for that particular post. So how would I do that? If we wanted to create an object model of the post. So use a constructor function. And let's say that API/posts to, so then again, this is my JSON response. We need an ID, title, content, and comments. So this constructor function is going to take in 4 parameters. And how would I create an instance, quote unquote, of this post? Very similar to Ruby. Yep, so I'll need to make references to this inside the constructor function. So I can assign the title, content, as well as comments. Awesome. But then inside my callback function from the return of the promise of the fetch request, how would I create a new instance of post? We'd have to call new and then post, and then pass in those respective values. So because post is an object that we get back, then we can call, we can call the dot method. So post dot ID, post dot title, post dot content, and post dot comments. All these values will get attached, passed in to this constructor function, and we can set this value to a new variable and call it new post. So const new post equals new post, and then pass in those respective values. From there, now we have a new object. And let's console.log that new object here. We can see we've got the new object with those respective quote unquote attributes, you want to call it, of comments, content, ID, and title. Now that we have this object, we can start to format the HTML that we need to render this particular object to the DOM. So I'm going to want to create a new method on the post prototype down here. Post.prototype. Oops. And then I'm going to call it format post. And set that equal to a function. So used to doing arrow functions. Set that equal to a function to where now inside this prototype function, or the method for the prototype, we have access to that particular post that we call this method on. And we do that with the this keyword. So then what we can do is start to format the actual JSON response, or the actual HTML response that we want. Cool, let me just stop real quick, make sure there are no questions. Cool. Awesome. All right, so now let's do, so const HTML. I'm going to set that equal to a template string. And inside that template string, for now, let's just do this dot title. I'm going to return HTML. So then const post HTML equals new post dot format post. So again, we can kind of think of methods on the prototype as instance methods, quote unquote. So then when we create a new instance of post, we can call that method on that particular instance. And then my return value that I get is the formatted HTML. That's going to be set equal to this variable here. And if we were to log that to the console, oops. Awesome, there we go. Cool. All right. Cool. So now we can start to formulate the full HTML response that we want, and then use that to append the DOM with that HTML. And then again, this is all happening without a page refresh. First, I'm going to set that equal to an empty string, then set HTML equal to that. Sorry, just want to make sure I'm getting the right HTML response. There we go. Awesome. H1. H1. Cool. All right. So now let's go back up to here. When we make a click on the next button, what I want to do is I want to empty out the DOM here. because eventually we're going to replace it with the new HTML from the new post. So let's double check our show page. And actually, let's do this because my app is rather small. I'm just going to wrap this entire thing in a div app container. Then we can start thinking about making this a full-on single-page app. So then in my JavaScript, what would I need to do to clear out that div so that it's just a blank slate? While you're thinking on that, let me just double check here. Where is .format post coming from? Yeah, good question. So format post is a method that I declared on the post prototype. So post.prototype.format post is set equal to this function here, so that any new instance of post that I create has access to call this format post method. So that's why you can see up here in line 21, I create a new post by calling new post, passing in all the particular attributes. And then down here, I'm calling new post.format post. Because again, it's a method on the post prototype. So again, any objects of type post, I can call that format post method on. Good question.
Quick question. In addition to that one, so when you say post.prototype, that allows you to create a method, like in this case, format post, and put it in that object. Is that how it works? You can kind of create that on the fly?
Yeah, because we could technically declare that method here, format post equals function, and then do stuff. But then the problem with that is every instance of post is going to have its own format post method, which, because format post is going to be the same for all instances of post, there's no need for each one to have its own method of format post. By declaring it on the prototype, then each instance of post is going to look, they're first going to look at itself to see if they have their own format post method. And if they don't, they're going to look up to the prototype. So if we get rid of this and I call new post.format post, this new post is first going to look at its own constructor function and say, okay, do I have my own format post method? No, I don't. Let me look up to my prototype and see if there's a format post method. And it's going to say, oh, there is one. So I'm going to use this particular format post method. Otherwise, again, if we declare it here, then you're going to be using up additional memory that you don't need to use up. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And yeah, .html, app-container.empty. Cool. So let's do that. And it's an ID, so it's going to be app-container. .html is just going to be an empty string, so that whenever we click on the next button, the first thing it's going to do is, I forgot to wrap these in quotes, is clear out the DOM. So awesome. So now we have a blank DOM, and we can repaint the DOM with the new post, which is the next post, oddly enough. Cool. So let's do this. So title is H1. Author, we don't have an author yet, so we need to add that to the serializer. And we can take advantage of the relationship of belongs to author. Oh, you know what? I think it's user. I don't think it's author. I don't think I created aliases. There we go. Yeah, user. So then we get that back in the response. So in my JavaScript, I'm going to need to make sure I also pass that as well. Here, I'll make it the last post dot user this dot user equal to user. Cool. And I believe author is an H2, if I'm not mistaken. This dot user dot email. Cool. And let's make sure that after we format the post, let's add it to the DOM. So we're going to do app container dot append. We can do either append or HTML. Let's just do append. Cool. Next. Bam. Okay. Let me make sure it's all formatted the right way. Somewhat. One thing. Cool. Other things we need to make sure we do. So this is the content. I believe that's a p tag. This dot content. And this is author in front. Just want to make it all look the same. Title. Cool. One thing that's not happening is up here, when we click on next, it's still showing the route for post 2. So how can we update the particular ID here? Anyone know how to dynamically update the URL at the top? So we can take advantage of the history object. Oops.
I'm just reading here, so I could push state.
Yep, push state. Yeah, exactly. So then the way that works, push state takes in 3 arguments. The first 2 we don't need to worry about. The third one is the actual new route that we want. So let's see. This is on the next. So we can do that. And we'll do that at the end after everything is resolved. So we can do history dot push state. You can pass in null for the first 2. And then again, the second one is the new route that we want. So posts / and then we want ID, but we don't want this ID because this is still 2. We want ID plus 1. Awesome. So let's take a look and see what we got. Whoops.
Uh-oh.
There we go. So it adds it to the root. Just remember, it adds it to the root of the app. So that's why I needed to do /post/ID. Now it's looking good. We've got the right route. We're able to click next. So now we just need to finish it. Let me just double check. So you guys get the idea of, I don't need to finish rendering the rest of the HTML. Now in terms of the previous, it's going to be pretty much the same, where we're going to be essentially doing the same thing, except now we're just going backwards. So if I render post 3, let me just make sure. Good, good, good. Click on previous. I append. So this is one thing. Oh, I forgot to clear out the app container. There we go. Awesome. And I forgot to push state. There we go. Cool. So what's a problem with this particular format? You could think of one.
If the next or previous ID doesn't have a post.
Yeah, let's say I deleted a particular post. So we'd need to update the functionality of the app so that I'm not making an API call to either the previous ID or the next ID. I'd want to create a new route that maybe is titled API/post/next. And I'll kind of stub that out quickly before I let you guys go. And then maybe we can make that the focus of the next study group. Cool. So I'm going to declare a route API/post/next. It's going to go to the API_next action in the post controller. And what I want to do here, let's define it right here. Def API next. And what I want this particular action to return is the next post in the database, not necessarily the next one in terms of ID. I want it to return the next one in the particular database. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create a new method in the post model. So let's see, @post equals, or we'll call it @nextPost equals post dot. We can call it post.next. And move over to my model. Let me see the comments here. Good. Awesome. Okay. Cool. So I want to declare an instance method called next in my post model. And what I want to do is use an active record query of where ID is greater than, whitelist it, and call it a first. Awesome. So let's do this. Oh, you know what? In my routes, API posts /ID next, because we need the ID. API next. At post.next. Did I not save it? I did save it. Ah, I forgot to set the post. So in my controller, I need to also set the post API next. There we go. So now we're here in this pry. Self is obviously that instance. So if we only did this part here, self.where ID is greater than the current post ID, we get an error. Oh, you know why? We need to call it on the class. There we go. So self.class.where ID is greater than the ID that comes in, which is 2, and we call the first on that, we get no posts. Okay, thought I had that query right. Huh. So yeah, Marcel, because you actually said, what if I deleted, the post with ID of 4? So then if I'm on 3, if I added 1, then Rails is going to try to search for the post with ID 4. Yeah. Whereas I wanted to return to us the next particular post, regardless of, what that ID were, because, through the app, you're going to be adding, deleting posts. But I'm curious as to why this query is not working. Let's see. Retrieve the next object. do some debugging here. 1 second. Cool. So that's me post with ID of 2 at post.next. Brings me into that one. So yeah, I should be do self.class.where ID is greater than whitelist that particular one. There we go. There we go. Okay, well, probably had a typo somewhere. So yeah, this is going to give me the array of all the IDs after post number 2, and we can just call dot first on that to give us that first one. So let's say that I, post dot delete post dot all. So now we can see 3 is gone. We're still on the second post inside our pry here. So if I do that query here, it's going to give us the post with ID of 4, even though we deleted the post with ID of 3. So we can just use this logic so that we can make an API call to API post /ID /next or pre, whichever one, and it's going to return to us that particular object. So then in our API next, we can just render JSON at next post. And that'll give us that next post regardless of ID, whether it's 1 later or 10 IDs later. Cool. Awesome. Any questions? I'm going to post this repo up just so you guys can take a look at it, and play around with it if you want to pull it down. But again, this is just a contrived example. Your apps are probably going to be, different namespace and different app domains, but just wanted to give you guys a general idea of making, an API call. And I would try to use fetch, try to use as much ES6 as well, arrow functions, things of that nature, just because starting to become a lot more popular out there in the wild. So.
All right, thanks.
Cool. All right, guys.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Have a good night. Take care.
I gotta go shovel again.
Have fun.
Brutal. Take care, guys.